Very excited to be joined now by Logan Phillips, our partner here, Race to the White House for election forecast. As a reminder, some of this will be behind the paywall up until later, so breakingpoints.com. You can take advantage with BP 2024 if you want that discount. But let's start with something that really caught our attention here, Logan, which is Polymarket, the largest betting place for the election, saw a significant swing in odds towards Donald Trump yesterday. Let's put that up on the screen. Trump, as of yesterday, was leading some 8.6% in the odds. That was actually his biggest lead since Kamala Harris entered the race. I want to ask you to opine on betting, and we are not giving any financial advice here on the show. How does that comport with your forecast? Is that overly rosy? How do you look at it?
Well, a few years ago, people were saying that maybe this is going to be the most predictive way to understand what's going to happen in elections because, you know, people are going to care a lot about where they put their money.
Yes.
I think 2022 proved that's not necessarily the case. I think what it shows is what the people that choose to bet on politics will think about the election.
Oh, I like that. Yes.
And the problem is it's hard for us to say exactly who that's going to be. I think it tends to lean right. Specifically college-educated right, more establishment. So you're going to see way higher odds from Ron DeSantis than made sense back in the GOP primary.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
And higher odds for Republicans. Now,
has anybody polled that? Because that's an answerable question.
Well, yeah, but the problem here is this is all crypto, so it's like
they're not going to.
I mean, listen, Polymarket's not even legal technically in America, so you know you need a VPN. I'm not going to give any instructions, but just in terms of the way that it all gets done, it's not all that easy for the general public. But that's a really interesting point. Can you talk more about 2022? What were some of the observations you saw ahead of that?
Yeah, so going into 2022, the odds that this might have something to it seemed higher. But if all the polls are missing to the left, that means anything that's missing to the right is going to look better than it might actually be as an indicator. So in 2022, the narrative overrated Republicans and they overrated them significantly more. And so all of these Senate races, people thought Republicans were going to win that they didn't win.
Right.
And it just showed, this is an imperfect measure.
That's a fantastic point, especially with the more recency of political betting markets and this one and two. And we shouldn't forget, you know, it's $1 billion market or so. It sounds like a lot. It's actually not that big if you think about the stock market or anything else with corrective forces. And everybody knows even though those are not all that accurate. Let's go to the next one because that was on Pennsylvania. This was another one where I wanted your input. They're showing a 56-44 spread towards Donald Trump in the state of Pennsylvania, some 12-point swing, in the betting market. So just from a polling level, where does Pennsylvania actually stand right now?
Oh, it's lightly favoring Harris.
Really?
I would say about 60% chance in my model. Most are about the same. There definitely wasn't anything in the last week. I think in my model, the polls got a little better. I haven't added the New York Times ones yet.
Better for Harris.
No, they got a little better for Trump.
Better for Trump.
Post-debate thing faded. But we're talking in my model at least from like, Harris had a 59-60% chance to win. Now it's 57.
Wow.
So that's a very small reduction.
Yeah, it's very, very small. You just mentioned there the New York Times polls. They just came out this morning, and perhaps we'll delve into it a little bit more. But, you know, just to get your general analysis, I think what we have from them is likely voters. They show Kamala with 49%, Donald Trump at 46%. This is likely voters at the national level. Is that enough of a national popular vote lead to be able to win the election? Because you can win the popular vote, as we all know, and still lose the Electoral College.
Well, I was just reading Nick Cohen's results in my Uber over here this morning, and you know he makes the argument, which I tend to agree with, that the polls suggest Harris is underperforming a bit in some of the blue states like New York, perhaps is underperforming in Florida as well. At least that's what their polls show, even though others don't.
Yeah.
And so she might have an electoral college advantage because she appears, as Democrats did, to be gaining in places like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, at least relative to where the popular vote was.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we saw that in 2022. If you had the popular vote tied, like isn't Democrats doing slightly better, and you just look at the House vote, they would have won enough to easily win the Electoral College. I believe that would have even included North Carolina, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada. Now, it doesn't appear as strong this cycle as it did in 2022, but it looks notably better than it did in 2020 and 2016, and a little bit better than 16. Now, will that happen in reality? We don't know, but the two metrics we can look at, 2022 and the current polling, suggest that's the case at least.
So let's talk about that. So you talked about Florida there. They show Trump up by some 13 points. That actually actually fits with something that we really, really wanted to talk to you about, which is this bet that Nate Silver has made. Guys, let's put that up on the screen, please. That's C3. So Keith Raboy, he's a billionaire down in the state of Florida. He bet Nate Silver $100,000 that Trump, so Nate said, how much money are you willing to bet on a Trump plus 8-point spread in Florida? Keith says $100,000. Nate says, drop a contract and let's do it. So would you have taken that action? And keep in mind, this is before the New York Times poll that shows Trump up by 13 points. What do you think? Wise bet or not?
Well, it's not a bet I would have taken.
Okay, all right.
I think part of that might have to do with the fact that Race to the White House might be doing fairly well, but it's not doing as well as Nate Silver. Right, So I don't know if I have the $100K laying around for this bet.
Okay, let's say you had $10 million.
$10 million. Well, I love this question. Well, let's make this a thing.
All right, $10 million. So what is that? 1% of your net worth, something
1%.
like that?
I would have made it at the time Nate Silver made it.
Okay, all right, there we go.
I still think it's most likely going to be under 8.
Yeah.
This New York Times poll is a giant outlier. And to be fair, for most of this cycle, New York Times has been the outlier.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to be, beating the same drum too much because I've said this before on the show. They're an amazing pollster, but they also have been consistently missing to the right. So most likely, in reality, they'll miss to the right unless they're seeing something everyone else isn't.
Let's editorially, let's just make sure, because people are like, wait, New York Times to the right? How does that work? So we're not talking about editorial, like they have a balance. You're talking specifically about their polling
Just the polling this particular cycle.
Their polling has missed. It's been too favorable to Republicans over the years.
Just this year, and I'm not even sure if it's wrong. It just probably is because all the polls combined are worth a lot more than New York Times, as great as the New York Times polling record is, right? So they're clearly seeing an electorate that's a lot more favorable to Trump. Their read on Florida is that the state has shifted since COVID measurably, which is viable, that people just decided to move there who wanted to escape regulations. In general, people have been moving. There's immigration that can move a state left, and there's also migration that can move a state left and right. And in Florida's case, the immigration from Cuba can also move it right as well,
Totally.
right?
Good point.
So we don't really know yet for Florida which one it's going to be. I think it's possible pollsters, if this is actually happening, might underrate it, because sort of the cheap shortcut for pollsters sometimes is to say, hey, let's find an electorate and ask them how they voted in 2020, and we're going to have the electorate be reflective of what happened in 2020. So if it was an R+3 state, we'll show it R+3. Now, off the cuff, I don't remember exactly how Florida voted to the decimal point or anything, but it definitely appeared in 2022 to move to the right. And so if that is a result of a different voter base, then some of these pollsters might be underrating Trump there.
Now, so North Carolina and Florida North Carolina was devastated by a hurricane. Florida's about to be devastated by a hurricane. 20 years ago, when Republicans were the party of the upper middle class, the people who had their ducks in a row, had their IDs out, had been voting at the same polling location for decades because they'd owned their home for 30 years at this point, they were the ones that would benefit in an unstable environment. That's why today, at the time, polls of likely voters benefited Democrats, whereas registered voters voted Democrats. Likely voters benefited Republicans because they were more likely to go out to vote. From that, you saw all these voter restriction, ID, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's flipped. You've got a lot of working class support for Republicans. They're more itinerant voters, less likely necessarily to show up in a difficult circumstance. Florida and North Carolina have extremely difficult circumstances when it comes to voting. So is that going to help Democrats who are now the party of the upper middle class, who are kind of know where their ID is, know where their voting location is, et cetera? It's completely unpredictable, but what would you guess if you had to at this point?
That's such a tough question. It's entirely possible. I would also say, though, that part of this is how the government responds. Now, North Carolina GOP, more so than most parties who are in control of the state, have been willing to play some electoral games to get advantages, like redrawing the maps. But if they're going to do whatever they can to get their voters exactly what they need to be able to vote. So I think you'll see some marshaled effort by the state to ensure that doesn't happen, at least in more of the white working class areas.
Yeah.
Though it might happen across the board. I don't want to accuse someone of something they haven't done yet, right? So that might mitigate it to a degree. I think above all else, though, it's going to be more of a sentiment effect. And we don't know how voters are going to view the response by these politicians. On average,
pissed off, right?
They're going to be upset. And here's where I'm concerned to a degree, right? Because when bad political incentives get in the way of what needs to happen, that's where there's some danger.
Yeah.
I'm worried about the House not giving the funding needed to have a good response here, because making the Biden-Harris administration look bad might be worth it for them. I'm not saying that's true for most Republicans,
right,
but given the way the House usually works, is that they need the majority of the majority to agree, or you need an outright majority of House members to agree,
right.
And you only have like 6 to spare, and there's way more than 6 who are willing to play those types of games.
That's a good point.
But what you also want in that moment is a leader who can command the respect of the entire country, who can,
Yeah, that's right.
Do we have that?
I don't know. Here, let's move on to the Senate, actually, because on the state level, you're getting to something that's really important. As a reminder, this is going behind the paywall, guys. You'll be able to watch it later, but for our premium subscribers, they can continue watching.
It's going to be good stuff, so you better.
It is great stuff.
Better subscribe.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's go ahead and put your...
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show, ad-free, and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.